and we're approaching Tisha B'Av. And it's worthwhile during these 3 weeks. The purpose of the 3 weeks, in a sense, is to prepare for Tisha B'Av. And regarding Tisha B'Av, the custom is that we do not say Tachanun. Tachanun is a special prayer. And it's a prayer in a sense that perhaps could be identified with Sa'aka, with crying out to God. And consequently, days that are associated as Jewish holidays, some even minor Jewish holidays, we refrain from saying Tachanun. And Tisha B'Av, which perhaps is the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, strangely enough, Tachanun is not recited. And the question is, why shouldn't Tachanun be recited on Tisha B'Av? My uncle has a very beautiful explanation, but when you look at the poskim, they suggest that the reason for it is because in Eicha, it's identified as a moed. Moed literally means a set time. However, they interpret moed to be like a holiday. So Tisha B'Av is considered like a holiday based on the usage of the term moed that is mentioned in Eicha. And since it's identified as a moed, as a holiday, so we refrain from saying Tachanun on that day. Now, but the concept of Tisha B'Av, the saddest day of the year, being a moed, being a holiday, needs to be understood. Now, it's true that the Navi, the prophet in Zechariah, says Tzom HaRevi'i, the fast of the 4th month, and counting from Nisan, Tishrei is the 4th month. But Tzom HaChamishi, the fast of the 5th month, which is Tisha B'Av, because the 5th month, counting from Nisan, is of B'Tzom HaShvi, that's the fast of Tzom Gedalia, because Tishrei is the 7th month, counting from Nisan. B'Tzom HaAsiri, the fast of the 10th month, is Asara B'Teves, because Teves is the 10th month, counting from Tishrei. These are all 4 fast days. All 4 fast days that commemorate and are dedicated to remembering the Churban, to remembering the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, to remembering the events that led up to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, as well as the event recalling how the Jews outside the land of Israel in Bavel heard about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. But the Navi says, Yeh lebeis Yehuda, these 4 fast days will be in the future, l'sason u'l'simcha, days of joy and happiness, u'l'moadim tovim, and true holiday, good holidays. Ba'emes b'hashalom ahavu, and the truth and peace you shall love. And So all 4 fast days will eventually be Yom Tovim, will be days of joy. Now, I've discussed in the past, why should these 4 fast days eventually become holidays? And the simple explanation, I think, is because these 4 fast days are days of prayer, days of beseeching God, days of crying out to God for help to see the trouble that we're in. And when our prayers are answered, they become days of joy and happiness. So when Mashiach comes, and according to many Rishonim, even during the Bayis Sheni, when the Jewish people had already rebuilt the Beis HaMikdash, so these days became holidays because these were the days that the prayers of those days were answered. And we find a similar concept in the Rambam, in his Minyan HaMitzvos HaKotzer, which is found at the beginning of the first volume of the Yad Chazaka, when the Rambam talks about various mitzvos, the Rabbanan, various rabbinic mitzvos, and he uses Purim as one of the examples. And he's in discussing about Purim, it's only a line or two, but he says that Purim is a holiday that was instituted to praise God because of the demonstration of how God is close to our prayers. The Jewish people at the time of the Gzeira, at the time of the degree of Haman and Achashverosh, Laharog La'abed is called Yehudim, a final solution plan was put into effect. Not much different than the plan that is being called for by many of those who demonstrated last week in Washington, D.C. And when our prayers were answered, and the Jews were saved from that catastrophe, it's not just the celebration of our salvation, which it certainly is, but Purim is a celebration, as the Rambam puts it, that's expressive of the closeness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to the Jewish people in answering their tefillos, in answering their prayers. And I assume that the reason the 4 fast days will become holidays, Yomim Tovim, Sosom V'Simcha, days of joy and happiness, or days of happiness and joy, is because the prayers, the crying out to God, that took place on these 4 fast days will have been answered. But if that's the reason that Tisha B'Av is considered a holiday, one has to question as to why the other 3 fast days are not also considered holidays. It's true. Eicha is only talking about Tisha B'Av. It's only talking about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. But we have to understand, why should it be different? The Gemara, I've mentioned this Gemara before. The Gemara in Tainus, the end of Tainus, says, Kol HaMesabel al Yerushalayim Zoche v'roa b'nechamasa. Whoever mourns on Jerusalem, he merits and sees in its consolation. And I heard from my father, and actually my father mentioned this shot of her to the Lubavitcher Rabbi, Zechet Tzadik Livracha, when he went to Menachem Avelhem, when his wife passed away. Reb Chaim Volozhiner said, why does it say Zolche v'roa b'nechamasa? He merits and sees in its consolation. It should have said Yiske. He will merit the Yira and will see in the consolation of Yerushalayim, the consolation of the Beis HaMikdash, the consolation, perhaps, of the Jewish people returning to Eretz Yisrael. And Reb Chaim Volozhiner said, because the consolation that we have as a result of the mourning over the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, over the lacking of the Beis HaMikdash, of the Jews being in exile, that will be a source not only of consolation at the end of days, when Mashiach comes, b'mheira b'yameinu, but it's a source of consolation right now. It was a source of consolation thousands of years ago. And perhaps we could use as a basis for what Reb Chaim Volozhiner said. The Gemara at the end of Maakos. The Gemara at the end of Maakos tells how Rabbi Akiva, together with a number of other Amoraim, Tanaim, excuse me, together with a number of other Tanaim, were walking outside Yerushalayim. And when they saw the Makom HaMikdash, they saw the place of the Beis HaMikdash. In accordance with the halacha, they tore their clothes. And then they saw a shul from afar. They saw a shul, a fox, exiting from the Kodesh Kodashim, from the Holy of Holies, from the site of the Holy of Holies. Because the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash was so great that wild animals were trampling on the holiest places of the earth. And they all began to cry for Rabbi Akiva Mitzachik. And Rabbi Akiva, I wouldn't translate Mitzachik there as laughing, but was expressing happiness. There was an impression of happiness. And Rabbi Akiva's, those who accompanied Rabbi Akiva, his colleagues, if I could use that word, they were in a state of shock over Rabbi Akiva's reaction to seeing this sight. And they said to Rabbi Akiva, why are you happy? Why are you mitzachek? And Rabbi Akiva said to them, why are you crying? And they said, the Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies, was the place that only the Kohen Gadol could enter one day a year. And now a common fox, a shul, tramples on those grounds. And Rabbi Akiva said, well, that's why I'm mitzachek. That's why I'm happy. Because now that I see the fulfillment of the prophecy of the destruction, of the utter destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, biyadua, it is known to me that another prophecy will take place. And that prophecy is the prophecy of Od Yeshvu Skenim V'Skenos B'Yerushalayim, that people will live in Yerushalayim, will reach elderly years. The Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt. The Jewish people will return. So the question is, Rabbi Akiva, the greatest of the Tanaim, is it possible that he had doubts? About the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash. He needed the shul to see it. He needed the fox. Didn't he believe in the words of the Nevi'im? Who, before he saw the fox, leaving the Kodesh Kodashim, leaving the Holy of Holies. Why is it? Only at that point he showed signs of happiness. Rabbi Akiva was the eternal optimist. But he says, be a doer. Now it's known. It's clear to me. And beforehand, it wasn't clear to him that the words of the Navi were true. We know if it's a good report, and the Navi gives a nevuah that is positive. It has to be fulfilled. And not to believe the words of the Navi would make someone a kofar. It's a form of heresy. So how is it possible that Rabbi Akiva said, be a doer? I know. But I think that biyadua, the word yediyah, means knowledge. I've mentioned many times. The Rambam at the beginning of Yad HaChazaka, he says, Yisod ha-yisodos v'amud ha-chochmos, the foundation of all foundations, and the pillar of all knowledge, Sheyesh Matzeh Rishon. There's he who was first, and not in the sense, but was always there. B'hu mamtzi kol nimtza. He brings into existence anything that exists. B'chol hamintzayim, and anything that's found bein shemayim la'aretz, between heaven and earth, eino ela me'amitas himtzo, comes from the truthfulness of his existence. In other words, a man has to know of God's existence. What does it mean to know of God's existence? There are those who say that knowledge of God's existence manifests itself in knowing the philosophical and perhaps scientific proofs of God, of the existence of God. Aristotle mentioned all kinds of proofs. The Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim adopted these proofs. So there are those who suggest that that's what it means, knowledge of God's existence. But my uncle said something else. In all your ways, know him. What does that mean? That means when you see the sunrise, my uncle said, you don't just see the sunrise, you see God putting the sun up. When the events that take place in the world take place, it is because God enables those events to take place. He lets those events take place. When we have salvation, it's God who brought that salvation. Everything that takes place in the world It's God who is having it take place. He's enabling it to take place. So be a dua, according to my uncle, doesn't mean just knowledge. It doesn't just mean that I know the philosophical proofs, but it means something much more than that. It means to experience. It's not enough to believe in God's existence. You have to experience God's existence. And what Rabbi Akiva said was that up till that moment, up to the moment when he saw the nevuah, the prophecy of the destruction of the Makom HaMikdash, of the place of the Beis HaMikdash, when he saw the Shul Yotzei Mikbeis Kadshe Kadashim, when he saw the fox leaving the site of the Holy of Holies. So he believed. It's one of the Yud Gimel Ikrim. Ani Mamin Be'amuna Shleima B'Vias HaMashiach. He believed. But at that moment, he not only believed in the coming of the Mashiach, he not only believed in the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, he not only believed in the return of the Jewish people to Eretz Yisrael, to Yerushalayim, to living their full lives there. Oh, Yeshu Skenim, V'Skenos B'Yerushalayim. But when he saw the fulfillment of the prophecy of the tragedy of Tzion Sada Techaresh, that Zion will be plowed over. When he saw the Shul Yotzei Mibeis Kadshe Kadashim, when he saw the fox leaving the spot of the Holy of Holies, at that moment, he was able to experience the beginning of the Gula, the beginning of the redemption. It's one thing to believe. It's another thing to experience. You know, when you read the newspapers, you can experience the coming of the Gula. And you have to remember the period of time that Rabbi Akiva lived. And Rabbi Akiva himself was a martyr. He was killed in the most painful of ways. And nevertheless, he was able to experience in some form or fashion the return to Zion, the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, of the coming of Mashiach. And each person is different. We're all required to believe. But each person, depending on who he is and on the events that are taking place, is able not only to believe, but sometimes able to experience the process taking place. And this is probably what Reb Chaim Volozhiner meant. Kol Masabel Yerushalayim. And the contrary, after all these years, we still feel the pain of the destruction of Yerushalayim. The pain and the destruction, the pain of not having the Beis HaMikdash, of not having. So at that same time, we can have a consolation in the coming of Mashiach and the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash. I think that that's what Reb Chaim Volozhiner meant, although that was not told over to me. All was told over to me was that he said that it's in the present tense. However, when my father mentioned it, this thought to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe understood, and to a large degree, he was correct. Certainly, from the perspective of the thinking of Reb Chaim Volozhiner, as it is in the Nefesh HaChaim, that before the Beis HaMikdash Lamata could be rebuilt, the Beis HaMikdash Lamala, before the Beis HaMikdash, the temple, could rebuild down here in our world, on earth, the Beis HaMikdash Lamala, the Beis HaMikdash in the heavens, has to be rebuilt. Reb Chaim Volozhiner in the Nefesh HaChaim says that Titus and Nebuchadnezzar, those who gave the orders to destroy the Beis HaMikdash, those whose armies burned the Beis HaMikdash, they were only able to destroy the Beis HaMikdash Lamata, the Beis HaMikdash down on earth. But it was the sins of the Jewish people that destroyed the Beis HaMikdash Lamala, that destroyed the Beis HaMikdash in heaven. On the basis of mystical tradition, in accordance with Kabbalah, just like there is a Beis HaMikdash Lamata, just like there is a holy temple down here on earth in our world, in heaven too, there is a Beis HaMikdash. But Titus and Nebuchadnezzar, the enemies of the Jewish people who destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, did not have the power to destroy the Beis HaMikdash Lamata, the Beis HaMikdash down on earth, until the Jewish people with their sins destroyed the Beis HaMikdash Lamala, destroyed the Beis HaMikdash up on earth. Logic would dictate that perhaps in order to bring about the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, Lamata, the Beis HaMikdash Lamala has to be rebuilt. And how is the Beis HaMikdash Lamala rebuilt? By us perfecting our ways, by us doing tshuva, by us coming close to one another to undo the sinas chinam, the cheap hatred that brought about the destruction, of the Beis Hamikdash. And my father's response to the Rabbi is that while that's true, but he felt that there is a nechama, not just, and I assume what the Rabbi meant is that with our avelus, with our mourning over the Beis Hamikdash, we are rebuilding the Beis Hamikdash Lamala. And I would suggest apply in accordance with the application that I made of the Gemara at the end of Maakos with Rabbi Akiva, that when Rabbi Akiva saw how his colleagues were mourning over the Beis Hamikdash, and when he saw that in spite of the fact that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the Mesorah of Torah continued. So to him, he was able to experience the process of the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. And my father said to the Rabbi that there is a nechama, not just, he suggested, not just regarding the Beis Hamikdash Lamala, but there is a nechama in the Beis Hamikdash Lamata as well. And I want to explain it. I've explained it before, but I think before Tisha B'Av, it's significant. The Baal HaTurim mentions in Parshas Lech Lecha that the word Lech Lecha, the expression Lech Lecha, was mentioned to Avraham Avinu twice. First, when Avraham Avinu received the command from God of Lech Lecha mi'artzecha mi'moladcha mi'beis avicha el haaretz asher areka. There, Lech Lecha is mentioned. When Avraham Avinu receives the command to leave the house of his ancestors, to leave his father's household, to leave Terach. There is a discussion in the Rishonim exactly how it worked, and to go to the land that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will show him. And then, and I think it's significant that he said that I will show you. And then it's mentioned also by the Akiva. When Avram receives the command to put his son Yitzchak on the altar and to get, and what appeared to be a command to give him as a korban, as a sacrifice. So Lech Lecha al Eretz HaMoriah, go to the land of Moriah, which our sages tell us was Yerushalayim. And the Baal HaTurim says the two expressions of Lech Lecha mi'artzecha mi'moladcha beis avicha, go to the land of Eretz Yisrael, the land that I'll show you. And Lech Lecha al Eretz HaMoriah, go to Yerushalayim, are a remez and an indication that the Jewish people are going to go into Golus twice. We'll go into exile twice. And it's very strange. The two psukim that talk about going to Eretz Yisrael and going to Yerushalayim are an indication and a hint to the Jewish people leaving, going into Golus, going to exile, leaving Yerushalayim and leaving Eretz Yisrael. ומפני חטאינו גלינו מארצנו ונצמחנו מאדמתנו. But it's obvious that according to the Baal Turim, that the journey to Golus is a double journey. On one hand, it is a journey away from Eretz Yisrael, away from Yerushalayim. And right now, that is the main focus of the Avelus of Tisha B'Av. The Kinnis emphasizes, not that there aren't certain sentences that make reference to our returning, but the main focus is our leaving. But simultaneously with leaving, we are going back to Yerushalayim. We're going back to Eretz Yisrael. And the question is, when did that journey of going back to Eretz Yisrael begin? That journey began the day of the Churban. The day of Golus. Tisha B'Av commemorates not just the beginning of the journey away from Yerushalayim, away from Eretz Yisrael, but it also commemorates the beginning of the journey back to Eretz Yisrael and back to Yerushalayim. And in a sense, we could say that that is the difference between the other fast days. The 3 of the 4 fast days, they will become Yom Tovim when our tefillos are accepted. That will happen when the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt. And according to the Rambam Shita, that will only happen when Mashiach comes. And perhaps that's the reason the pasuk says, "Va'emes va'shalom ahavu," love, truth, and peace. Because the only true peace will be when Mashiach comes. But so that's when we will be celebrating, just as the Jews celebrate Purim, because the acceptance of our tefillas. So the 4 fast days will be Sasana Simcha and Yom Tovim, because we'll be celebrating the acceptance of our tefillas. But Tisha B'Av is a Yontif also, because we began our journey. The journey began with the Jewish people overcoming the test of time, the test of Golus, and continuing to look forward to the returning to Eretz Yisrael. If we are looking, if we're able to see our journey, not just as a trip away from Yerushalayim, but if we're able to experience it as a trip towards Yerushalayim, towards Eretz Yisrael, then the two trips, the trip away from Yerushalayim and the trip towards Yerushalayim, simultaneously are the same trip. And so Tisha B'Av is a holiday even today, even before our tefillas were accepted, because at least theoretically, the trip towards Yerushalayim, towards Eretz Yisrael, that began on Tisha B'Av. And we are presently part of that journey. Now, when the Lubavitcher Rebbe heard from my father what Reb Chaim Volozhin said, when my father heard what the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, that it's the building of the Yerushalayim Shalmala, of the Beis Hamikdash Shalmala, the Beis Hamikdash of heaven, my father said that Kol Masabel Yerushalayim is a nechama even down here on earth, because for us it's a nechama when we see the survival of the Jewish people throughout the Golus. And perhaps to us, it might even be an easier task than to those in the time of Rabbi Akiva. But when we see the survival of the Jewish people, so we understand that it's not just the past events that cause the future events, but it's the future events of the return of the Jewish people, of the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash, that are causing the past events, the events that took prior to it, the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. That was something that was caused by the past events, primarily. It's interesting. When it comes to Avelus, when it comes to mourning over someone who passed away, my uncle discusses this question. So first you have Shiva. Those are the most intense, from a halachic perspective, days of mourning. And then you have Shloshim, the 30-day mourning period, which has more leniencies. And then you have Shana, over a parent. Mourning over a parent continues for a year's time. But that's even more lenient than Shloshim. It goes from the stringent to the lenient. But when it comes to the mourning over the Beis Hamikdash that we do every year. So first we have the 3 weeks, which we are presently in. And when we have the 3 weeks, that's the more lenient time of mourning. And then you have the 9 days and the week of Tisha B'Av, which is a little bit more stringent. My grandfather would say that the morning of the the 3 weeks correspond with the morning of the Shana, of the year of mourning over a parent who died. The morning of the 9 days, for the most part, correspond with the morning of Shloshim. And the morning of Tisha B'Av corresponds to a large degree with the morning of Shiva. It's almost in the opposite order. Why is it that way? I think it's that way because to a certain degree, who are we mourning? We're mourning ourselves. Because to a certain degree, we died. We caused our deeds. As Rabbi Chaim Volozhin says in the Nefesh HaChaim, Titus and Nebuchadnezzar, they could not have destroyed the Beis HaMikdash Lamata. They could not have destroyed the Beis HaMikdash down on earth. If the Jewish people, if we didn't destroy the Beis HaMikdash Lamata. And I think to emphasize that point, the mourning periods go from leniency to stringency. It's before the event, before the anniversary of the event, because it's our sins that brought about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So we're mourning not just the Beis HaMikdash, we're mourning our deeds. And it's with the recognition that it was our deeds that brought about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash that will rebuild the Beis HaMikdash Lamala. And when we change our ways, as my father would say, when we recognize how important the Beis HaMikdash is to us, that in itself is part of the process of rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash Lamata, of rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash down below on earth. And this is what our task. We have to understand that our trip away from Yerushalayim has to be turned into a trip in going back to Yerushalayim. You know, when the state of Israel was established, at that time, there were arguments whether the establishment of the state of Israel, the establishment of a Jewish state in the land that was given to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, was called, whether it's to be recognized as an aschal to the Gula, a beginning of redemption or not a beginning of redemption. I'm not sure that the terminology is important. But the having of a place, a Jewish state like the state of Israel, certainly gives us the potential to experience the returning of the Jewish people to Eretz Israel. Imagine, and I know there are problems now, But does anybody believe that in this contemporary time, if there hadn't been a state of Israel, that all the Jewish people, that all the yeshivas that exist would have been able to exist? Now that funds are threatened to be withheld by the judges of the Supreme Court of the State of Israel, people who don't recognize the significance and importance of Torah. And there is a danger about the yeshivas. But recognize what we had till now. And appreciate what we got. If we're proclaiming doom, to recognize, be grateful for the opportunities that the state of Israel gave. I have suggested, I will continue to suggest, that perhaps the resentment against the yeshivas, the resentment against the Haredi community, is not because of what people are saying. But if we want people to recognize and to appreciate what we are doing for Jewish life, what places of Torah are doing, and they certainly are, we have to recognize and appreciate what the others are doing for us. Today, to believe, after you see how the enemies of Jewish people are like Nazis, to believe that under Arab control, Torah life would exist. You have to be disconnected from reality totally. And sometimes people feel very comfortable doing that. And if we would appreciate those who give their lives for us, perhaps they will begin to appreciate, and they will certainly they certainly will not be so much opposed to religious life in Eretz Yisrael, to the religious community in Eretz Yisrael, and there would be cooperation between them. It's in the interest of everybody to recognize the contribution of everybody. But until the sinas kenam is eliminated, then I don't know to what degree we are contributing to the rebuilding of both the Beis Hamikdash Lamala as well as the Beis Hamikdash Lamata. Okay.
Okay, I have a few questions here. Are there differences between the Beit HaMikdash on earth, and is there a difference between the Beit HaMikdash Shalmala reflecting those differences?
Everybody has their own feelings, how they perceive it. It's a very interesting, very little is mentioned, indication. There is quite a bit of indication about Yemos Mashiach, but Olam Haba is beyond our grasp, beyond our imagination. And I'm sure the same is true about the idea of the Beis Hamikdash Lamala. It's beyond our grasp, beyond our understanding, the nature of it. Halavai, we would be able to understand the way the Beis Hamikdash Lamata would be, will be, and was and will be.
How and when did the laws of the 3 weeks and the 9 days get strict? The Gemara in Tainus doesn't seem to mention that.
Well, it seems that most of the laws refraining from avelus was a kiyum hamitzvah. You see, there's a special emphasis on the events that took place on Shavasa B'Tammuz and on Tisha B'Av in the Gemara. Very little is mentioned, although it's mentioned about the other two fast days, the different events that took place, about Ezra Sofer dying and all that. And my uncle says the reason there is a special emphasis on Shavasa B'Tammuz, by the way, it's also based on Maakos Shoked, actually, this past week's Haftarah, because Maakos Shoked, Ani Roeh, he saw an almond branch or a stick, an almond stick, and the stick, the almonds, according to Chazal, take 3 weeks to grow. So there was clearly an understanding that these 3 weeks had special status. It could be that the halachas that we have accepted upon ourselves as requirements today, in those days was not requirements, but something that people did. My sense is that at that point, their sense of loss for the Beis Hamikdash was so strong that they did it voluntarily. Ultimately, it had to become something that was accepted by the Jewish people later on. Exactly at what point it was accepted, I don't know. But it probably, in other words, there certainly was special status to the 3 weeks. We see it from all kinds of medrashim. And there are even indications in the Gemara to it, as my uncle said. But it wasn't something that was obligatory. And then we accepted upon ourselves as obligatory.
And is it really mutter to go to for fleishik restaurants to have a siyum during the 9 days for people to eat there?
It would be something. Let me put it to you this way: I would not have approved of it under normal conditions. I'm not finding fault with anybody. I don't like commercialization of siyumim, and if you have nothing to do with the one who is making the siyum, I have my doubts about the effectiveness of it. But I don't want to criticize anybody, especially since eating meat during the 9 days is really only a custom. It's not the Surah Mafsekes. So, but it's only a custom. So in these days when we're trying to promote the relationship between one Jew and the other, I don't want to be critical, but it's not something that my father approved of under normal circumstances. Okay.
Okay, there's no other questions, so thank you for the share. Thank you everyone for being here. And